So welcome to everybody listening now and in the future. This is a special talk today by Nir Esterman. It's part of the Pre and Perinatal Healing Online. My name is Kate White. I am the founder and the director there. And I have invited Nir, and Nir has worked in the online school, bringing his special training in the shadow constellations. Nir Esterman is the developer of Shadow Constellations, a teacher of family constellations and embodied shadow work, and a body psychotherapist. He developed shadow constellations from his 20 years of practice and personal experience, which includes overcoming cancer at age 22, years of supporting professionals from the healing and developmental fields, and having a full practice for over 14 years. So please go ahead, Nir.
Thank you, Kate. Welcome, everybody. There's always the first few minutes, there were only a few people sitting on the screen and like, how many people will come? How many people will just watch the recording? So I'm very glad that we have a full screen or two already. Thank you for coming in person today. It's appreciated. As Kate said, my name is Nir Esterman and I'm the developer of Shadow Constellations. And Shadow Constellations is interdisciplinary meeting point of family constellations developed by Bert Hellinger and shadow work developed in the modern form, at least, by Carl Gustav Jung. And over the last 7 or 8 years, this is mainly what I've been teaching. I've been working with people for a little bit over 20 or 21 years. Before that, I learned computer science and biology and science teaching. So I've crossed the lines a couple of times already, from the very scientific into the social sciences and into actually working with people instead of other constructs. And a part of what led me always in this path is really trying to understand how things work, why they work that way, to understand the mechanisms. And with computers, we know the mechanisms. We decided what would be the mechanisms, but when we get to people, it's always so much more complicated. And in my first training, way before Constellation 20 years ago, there was very little talk about transference and how people and how to hold the process regarding the relationship between client and facilitator. So unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I had to learn it all by myself. And then finding out that some very smart people already looked at it before me, and Freud and Jung and Melanie Klein and some other psychoanalysts. And at the same time, I felt that, yeah, they looked at it from a psychological point of view, but what about the less tangible, the energetic, the soul level? And this is where shadow constellations come in. It's like, basically in one sentence, how what we're not in touch with directly affects how we are with people and how they are with us, how safe we can be, how deep we can go, what can get into our space and what has to stay outside because it's too much for us to handle, even if we think that we can. Yeah, so I'm a little bit of a safety freak. In a way, my whole approach was written in blood, the blood of my heart, the blood of my client's heart, the blood of colleagues and their clients who, with the best of intentions, failed to do well or did some wrong. And we can't really work with people, especially with so much trauma and complex trauma, not stepping on some landmines. Okay, that's like impossible. But we can do our best to be better, to hold the space better, to be able to take responsibility better when we do stumble on a mine. So this is where my fascination with the shadow is mostly coming in the professional scene. I will say that the shadow influences not just our professional life, but also our romantic relationships, parenting, collegial relationships, and others. And so for me, it's like everywhere. I hope that, well, I guess it's for everyone. It's everywhere. I hope it will be able to see a little bit more of it today. So the shadow is basically what we deny, what we repress, what we do not accept in ourselves, what we are not willing for other people to show us about ourselves. The shadow, I sometimes look at it as like an area, a space in our body, mind, consciousness, into which we push or put self parts that were too dangerous to identify with when we were very small. Because of the family we grew up in, because of the culture we grew up in, and because of intergenerational traumas, and because of personal traumas. This is the classical shadow. I will also say that shadow is what we chose not to live, the choices we did not make. Shadow is also what we disengage or disconnected from on the soul level way before we had the consciousness on the psychological level. So all the pre and prenatal traumas fall into that part of the shadow. And of course, whenever we have a traumatic event, also some things go to the shadow. Some of the memory goes to the shadow, some of the experience, some of the wholeness that we had before the trauma goes into the shadow and is not available to us, at least until we heal it. How does it all come to play? If playing is the right word for it, in our client-facilitator relationship? Well, actually, in many ways. I'll name a few so that we'll have sort of a background. And then I'll take us through some short process, or if we'll be really short, then maybe we'll have enough time for 2 short processes, so that we'll have an experiential first-person sense of how the shadow affects us, and in one or two places, and maybe what can be done with it. So, from your experience, what happens when you meet a client, whether it's one-on-one or group settings, and there is something about them which you're really deeply not in touch with in yourselves? How does it show? In your experience, you can speak up or you can write in the chat. There could be an aversion or a judgment towards a client. Judgment is the hallmark of the classical active triggering of the shadow. And aversion is also right there next to it. It could be a more physical sense, tightness in the chest, throat, belly, feeling of stepping on the brakes. So this is a bit closer to a freeze response. And so I already have fight, flight, and freeze in the first two responses. It could be colliding with the client. Yes, sometimes when we find ourselves fighting the client or educating them or becoming superior to them, these are all shadow responses.
Sorry, I didn't mean colliding, colluding.
Colluding, which means
so agreeing with them without even having the other person inside in my heart. Yeah.
So this is often a version of a freeze response or a friend's response, which is we become too friendly or unable to stand our own ground. And I feel a connection, but I know what that person is going through. If we're in touch with something inside of us, it helps us to feel empathy. If we're not in touch with something in us, usually what happens is that we lose empathy, not gain empathy. When we do our shadow work and reconnect with it, then we get back the empathy. I remember a relationship I had and then getting very intellectual and talking at the client rather than listening. Yes, that's also very common, and that we either go above the emotional level or on the other side go too deeply into the emotional level. We get off center when we are triggered by our shadow. We are not sitting here in our center, being able to hold the container well. We're moving in one direction or the other. Sometimes we want to run away. Sometimes we want to tell the clients to go away, right? We don't want to work with clients like this. We tell our supervisor or our colleagues, I act differently than how I usually act, and I'm aware of it, but can't change it. Right, so anytime that we're triggered, we naturally react differently. And until we get the root of why do I get triggered and agree, and this is the heart of shadow work, it's not just to identify that there is something here, but to identify what is it that I've lost touch with and choose to re-own it. This is at the heart of the work, and every time we do that, we move back to our center. We move back to seeing the other person more fully at an eye level, not above, not below. We have rejection and dislike, which are on the usually coming along with disgust sometimes and some forms of judgment. A tremendous relief when that client cancels their appointment. Definitely, it's a strong sign of someone triggering us in a flight response. When I feel the connection, I know what they are. Yeah, sometimes we become too friendly and we want to share from our experience and to teach them what worked and didn't work for us and to save them. In general, every time that we fall into the savior position or the savior role, it's our shadows of helplessness which are running the show. We can't stand the client helplessness, or we can't stand our own helplessness and being with a client that we can't seem to help. So we try to save them. And the same goes, by the way, to the other roles of the trauma triangle. From the same helplessness shadows, we can also become victims of our clients. If you had this unpleasant experience of feeling that you're the victim of your clients, you know what I'm talking about. It can happen, especially with personality disorders, but not only. And we can also become the perpetrators, the one who are actually re-abusing, re-traumatizing, or doing it from fresh. That also happens, okay? Sad, difficult to admit, but there's a growing body of evidence and understanding that therapy is one of the places where people get hurt a lot, not just a little, yeah? And some of it has to do with re-traumatization, and some of it has to do with us therapists and facilitators not sensitive enough, not trauma aware enough, and not shadow aware enough. If it is not connected to some of my other work or knowledge, I feel I may be not good enough to work with them. Could be fear of the unknown. Well, usually when we feel that we're not good enough to work with a client for some reason, it's actually our competence in the shadow. It's our ability to take the position of someone who has authority, which is in the shadow. Because as professionals, we have authority. We don't have to be authoritarians, but we have authority. And if we are not willing to acknowledge, because hierarchy, let's say, is in our shadow, then we're like, yeah, we're just two people working together, but that's not the case. One of us is paying, the other one is getting paid. One of us is coming to solve their problems, the other one is coming to solve the first one problems. It's a very big difference than friendship. And what no one said here, but I'll add just for completion, is two things. One is that when we get tired, when we want to yawn, when we fall asleep, in some cases, for the body workers, dozing off while working with a client, these are also shadow-related triggered responses. And when we get attracted to a client, which we all know we shouldn't be, right? But when we do, when we react to the presence of a client, even if it's just internally, even if it's just in our own mind, or our own body, it's not because something is necessarily wrong with us, and it's probably not because we found our perfect partners. It's because that sexual attraction also has to do with the shadow. And when we meet someone that we feel or project onto them, something that we really miss in ourselves and we really like, it's not there, it's disconnected in ourselves, then something in us, some actually very powerful healing force, wants us to reconnect, wants us to merge, wants us to become one. And if we're not careful, we can interpret it as sexual attraction. And if we're really uncareful, well, there's much more sexual abuse in clinical settings than we would have liked. And just to mention an interesting statistic I read once, in the US some years ago, there was a completely confidential survey, and they asked, I think it was psychiatrists and doctors, could be also psychologists, did you have clients that had a sexual relationship with their previous therapist? 6% said yes. Sorry. The question was, did you have a sexual relationship with your client? And 6% fully confidentially said yes. I don't know if that's a high or a low number. For me, it's very high. But the more annoying thing is that when they were asked, did you have a client that had a sexual relationship with previous therapist, 50% said yes. This is the prevalence. Not saying 50% of therapists do that. I'm just saying it happens a lot. And not always because they're wolves waiting to hurt people. I've seen too many people telling me how they fell in love with their therapist, and he or she fell in love with them, and they got confused and mixed in different ways. So sometimes it's blindness, and blindness is one of the hallmarks of the shadow. And so these are the ways that we're triggered by our shadows. It's just a part of the short list of how the shadow affects us in the clinic. And sometimes it's what we can't see. Something is happening, but we can't notice it. The client is suffering, but we miss it. The client is in an abusive relationship, and we try to tell them to stay. Sometimes we don't see something that happens between us and the client because it can't be, and it's not possible for us. This is something which is so deeply in our shadow. For example, it took me years to realize that clients can be scared of me because I'm not a scary person. I'm a safe person. I'm a nice person. I'm a smile. I'm respectful. I hold really nice and safe space. I never cross the boundaries. It took me years to realize that it has nothing to do with me. It has, well, very little to do with me. But I had to be able to see that it can be frightening to be in a position where someone has authority or power over you. It took me a long time because it was really deeply in my shadow. Some topics or some issues that client wants to work with will never come to our clinic. Maybe you've seen this. Your friends who learned with you are working with these topics, and some of them never reach your clinic. Let's say sexuality never reaches your clinic, or financial issues, or inheritance issues, or romantic issues never reach your practice, or very little. That's a sign. what reaches your colleagues but not yours is probably pretty well in the shadow. Another thing that happens, and I think that this is maybe one of the most meaningful and yet least spoken of things, is that the shadow is what makes us susceptible or vulnerable to being captured, to find ourselves unconsciously in a role for our clients without us understanding that it's not us reacting, it's something that we got entangled with or captured into that is happening. In classical psychology, it will be called transference relationship. Yeah. And the belief is that it has to be there and it's a part of the work. But unless we are a dynamic psychologist, we probably don't know how to work with transference from within. However, it's still there. Well, transference does not happen in an empty space. It can only happen if the therapist is willing unconsciously to become something for the client. I will not become your father, because I'm a man and all that, and as a bird sometimes, just because you're missing a father. You need to miss your father, and I need to be willing to want to replace the father that isn't there. And why would I want that? Well, I probably have some missing father issue in my family, which is too much in the shadow, which did not get enough work yet. And it may sound simple or simplistic what I just said, but it's actually very, very powerful. And we'll walk with some of that very soon, and I hope we'll get an experience of that. Yeah, if we get stressed before a session or a lesson that we want to teach, if we get foggy, if we lose focus, if we get too pushy, too overbearing, or too sharp, if we lose concentration or we lose connection with a certain participant or with the client or with ourselves while we facilitate, it has a lot to do with what is in our personal shadow, family shadow, cultural, collective shadow, gender shadow, depending also on the context or the specific content of that session. So actually, if you had that experience that you're working really hard with a client or working really hard with a group to make it work, chances are there is something there still either in your shadow or in both of your shadow, in the shadow of this therapy process, or the shadow of this constellation session, that was not yet acknowledged. And when it will be acknowledged and given place, then suddenly it becomes easier. And I've seen it happens, I don't know if hundreds of thousands of times, so I think that's a general rule with very few exceptions. There are always some exceptions. Okay. I have a question in the chat box. Let's see. What about the imposter syndrome? Is it a shadow of ours too? Okay. Imposter syndrome. In imposter syndrome, what we have is first a lot of anxiety, right? So we probably have a sense of safety, but mostly we have our self-worth in the shadow. And so people who suffer from imposter syndrome, and it's about, I don't know how many dozens of percentage of population in general and therapists in particular. We are not enough in touch with how worthy we are in a good way. When I'm clear about my worth with myself, I'm not very likely to fall into the imposter syndrome. It's where I'm not in touch with my worth. Now, of course, we all can fall to it once in a while, and because we have some small places, or maybe not so small, where we're not sure of ourselves, where the setting is new, where the challenge is bigger than before, And we can have that sense of maybe I'm just pretending I'm good and everybody will eventually find out, yeah? But actually, in a way, this sense of maybe I'm not really who everyone thinks I am, and I'm terrified of the time that people will find it, that's not just for professional areas, and it's not just for imposter syndrome. It's actually the very basic felt sense of having a strong shadow. There is something in me and it's not good and it's bad. It will be rejected. It will be unloved. It will be expelled from society if I don't hide it and pretend I'm something else. And that's the essence of having a shadow. So imposter syndrome may look like it's a standalone thing, but actually it's a part of a very big range of I have to hide who I really am. Because if you would really know who I really am or what I really am, you would not be here, right? I see some very long messages. I can't read them right now. I'll try to give them some time at the end of this 1 hour meeting, okay? And if I won't have time to, you're welcome to write me afterwards with any specific question, but I want to make sure you have an experience as well and not just me talking as much as it can be nice to hear me talking, I hope. So let's go into some experiential work. Please take a moment to think about a client that there is something uneasy or challenging or not clear about your relationship with them. If you want to be more specific for this structural purpose, I would choose a client that there is some form of a power imbalance between us that makes it somehow difficult. Maybe they look at us from below, maybe they are fighting us, and maybe they seem to be afraid of us. Maybe we don't see any of this, we just have this sense of attention which isn't clear. Maybe we didn't try to make it clear. Maybe we did and it didn't work or worked partially. It can be a client from the present time, but it can also be a client from the past. It doesn't matter for this structural purpose. Okay, do we all have one? Raise your hand if you have one in mind. You just need one, don't take two and combine them into one person, okay? You want a real person who is or was your client. Okay, does anyone need a little bit more time to choose one? Okay. So, now please look around you in the room and choose a bunch of items, let's say 4 or 5 objects. It can be just pieces of paper that you can write on. It can be anything from some rock you have on your table or the control of something or a lighter, whatever it is. Just pick 4 or 5 objects that we'll be using them as representations. I'll explain in a moment. Okay. And now please intuitively choose one of these objects to represent yourself, your essence in this relationship with this client. And the second one to represent this client that you're thinking about. And place the objects facing each other. It can be on the floor, it can be on your desk, whatever is comfortable for you.
Could you repeat that, please, Nir? I'm sorry.
Sure. One representation for yourself, and one object to represent your client, and place them facing each other in a distance which feels like a good distance. This is like our clinical distance. When we meet, even if it's on Zoom, this is the distance from which we are having this relationship. And after you place them, please step on, I will explain what I mean, your representation, meaning either if it's on the floor, step on it, or if it's on your desk, put your hand on your representation. And when you do that, don't try to understand anything. Just take a few moments to slowly notice whatever you sense and feel and think and imagine in this representation, which happens to be yours. You can notice your embodiment, your breathing, your stability. If you feel pushed or pulled in any direction, if there is any discomfort, you can notice your emotions, your strength, how many are there, are they moving, are they stable, are they stagnant? You can notice your thoughts. Maybe in your mind's eye, some images comes up. Maybe a sound is catching your attention, either in the room or inside of your mind. Sometimes a song or a lyric comes. Maybe a memory comes up from something that happens with this client or something completely different. And it could be that this memory isn't even yours, because this work is also intergenerational. And finally, notice, how do you feel with and towards the representation of your client? Do you feel at ease or not? How much space does each one of you take? Do you like them right now? Do you want to do something with them, for them, to them? Please don't judge anything that comes up, even if it's horribly judgmental or violent. Just notice. When you have a more or less clear sense of what you've noticed, step off your representation. Technically, you take off your hand, you give it a small shake, and you take a breath so that you return to be yourself. Now please take your other hand and place it on the representation of the client. Now we're going to stand in their shoes, wearing their socks. And forget what you know about the client and forget what you know about your relationship. Just notice what aspects of this client and your relationship comes to you now. Just like you did with yourself. The embodiment level. Emotional level. Mental. The mind's eye and ears and memory level. And finally, the relational level. How do you feel as you represent your clients towards your representation? Is there a difference in size, in power? Do you have any needs or wants from your representation? What do you see when you look at your representation from the client's eyes. Just notice, you don't have to do anything. You don't have even to remember it all. Just get a felt sense of it. And please step off. Shake your hand. Take a deep breath. And now we will add a third representation. This is a representation for the role that your client has put on you or put you in. Okay? And place it right next to your representation, with just a small space between your representation and the representation of the role. So there is some distinction, there is some separation now between yourself, your representation, and the role that the client put on you. And you unconsciously agree to take because of your shadow. And go back to your representation and just notice, how does it feel now? Is there any change with how you feel with yourself? And how you feel about your client? If there is a change, notice it. What is different now? And step off from your representation, take a breath, take your hand. And now add a fourth representation. This one is for the matching role that is on your side. Sorry, that is on the client side. Let's say if the client put a few representation of someone with lots of power, then maybe the client will have a powerless role in relation to yourself. If the client put on you a representation of an abusive mother, then they may have an abused child on their side. So you don't need to know what is the other role. We trust the energetic field here to just choose an object that feels intuitively right and replace it next to the client representation, right in front of the previous representation that we put. So there is me and the client, what he put on me, and the corresponding or matching role that the client is holding. And after you put it there, go back to your representation and notice how it feels now. Is there a change in how you feel with yourself in the client's presence? And is there a change in how you feel towards the client? Is there a change in empathy? Is there a change in hierarchy? A change in the sense of safety? Is there something that you can see now or be in touch with now that you could not before or not so clearly? It's okay if the answer is no to everything. We just check. Now we step off from our representation. Take a breath, shake your hand. And move back to the representation of the client. Take a moment to sense how it feels on the client side, whatever we've just done. Does it feel differently on their side on some level? Is anything different with their presence? Sense of safety? Ability to take space, to speak directly? A difference in the sense of ease, in the shared space, or anything else? And when you have a clear enough sense, you can step off, take a breath, shake your hand, and come back to the here and now. We won't do it now because of time constraints, but if we had time, I would have also invited you, and please don't do it now, to add a representation somewhere behind you for whatever it is which is in the shadow, being personal, family, collective, or other, that made you accept this role from the client so unconsciously. And this is if we had more time, we'll not do it now, but it's something to consider or to think about. Would anyone like to share? How was it for you? What did you experience? What changed, if something changed or didn't change?
Yeah, Nir. So this was a very revealing and a very inquiring experience. So I have a client who kind of goes overboard with her emotions most of the time. And sometimes I do find it difficult to maintain my position of just being the facilitator. So that's who I placed. So initially when I just placed myself and the client, I placed them at a good distance, decent amount of distance. But when the process started, I actually wanted to drop the representation of the client off the table. It was overwhelming. Then when I introduced the third element, when I stood in my own position, it changed to feeling extremely burdened, very heavy, and I felt solid and stuck to the ground, couldn't move, immobile. But I brought her back to the same position she was in. Instead of dropping her off the table, I brought her. And then when I introduced the fourth element and I walked into my cell, it was really funny. I had a sense of tremendous calmness, peace, feminine energy, a lot of love, and I felt like the mother. Then when I stepped out of that and I walked into my client's representation, she was very peaceful, very calm, very contained. She dropped everything that she had actually come with in the energy, and she actually took a step feeling very peaceful and good. I don't know how to decipher any of this experience. So thank you for this.
Thank you. Well, first, I'm glad it felt good at the end. And I will not say something about your client. I'll just say in general, in my experience with this specific structure, it's like one of many, this version of the work, that every time we manage to identify the fact that in a relationship where we got captured into some roles, and manage to, in a way, like step aside from the role, both of us. Immediately there is a sense of ease, immediately it becomes safer, immediately it becomes clearer, or at least almost always this is what happens, because we all come to therapy or to developmental work wanting to change, but we come with like fixated roles that we want the other person to be for us so that we can heal something that happened with usually parents, but not only, could be intergenerational and other things. And unconsciously, we try to recreate something so that we can fix it. When we can identify it and gently, not forcefully, to say, okay, there is this dynamic, but it's not really happening between the two of us originally. So we don't have to be in these roles. We can acknowledge them and see what relationship we can have, and then look at what happened between this person, your client, and whoever you're representing for your client, or what you're representing for your client. It sometimes can save a couple of years, in my experience, of really going around and trying every time to be okay when something is not okay, but it's not really, didn't begin with us as well, not just with your clients, with our clients, it didn't begin with us. Thank you for sharing. Candice, please.
Hey, thank you so much for this exercise. I just wanted to be clear on the last part. When you turn to the ancestors, is that correct? So this would be the process after you let go of going back to the client for the second time.
Actually, I wouldn't, in this case, turn back to the ancestral level necessarily. I would turn back into my shadow, because all this work is multidimensional. So the back is our ancestors, but it's also what we are not facing, right? So it's also the shadow. The shadow can be my personal shadow. It can be something unknown in my family. Let's say someone was persecuted and lynched in my family. But I don't know that because no one told me about it. No one knows about it. It happened 5 generations ago. So it's in my family shadow, but it's still there, right? It's intergenerational family shadow. When I will be coming to work with the group, I may have that sense of, oh, lots of people are dangerous. I can't be myself here, because if I'll be myself, something bad can happen. I have to leave the door open so I can run away. Maybe I shouldn't market so effectively, so I won't get so many people, so it will feel safer. And so could be many reasons why where something is in my shadow. It could be that some child in class hit me when I was in 3rd grade, and since then I fear people, right? So the thing about constellation work is, in general, that it doesn't require us to know. It requires us to be in touch and see what comes up. Because what comes up is not necessarily what happened, but it's the imprint left by what happened. And this is where we are walking from. The sharing that the process has ended with a feeling of being free and good feeling of warmness, of acceptance towards the client. Thank you. Yeah. Any last sharing? If anyone wants, or a question? Time for one quick question before I say a few words about the training. Okay. So, first, thank you for being here and taking part in this introduction and short process. The time is valuable. Or someone wants to speak? Fatima, please.
Hi. Hi. Am I audible?
Sorry?
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah, yes.
So my question was, I really enjoyed the process, but I was there's so much push and pull when the process was happening and when I was stepping in my own um, own element that I don't know what to do next, like, and then whenever the client has come and it turned out to be more into asking for the money, like, and then there was a lot of push and pull, and that's where I struggled, and I realized it's just giving me sweat. So a lot of anxiety which has popped up. Yeah, I don't know what to do. So is it like, if I have a client, do I do it before they come in, or should I do it after, like, because there is this tug of war which is going within me?
Yeah, I usually, like, best practice, if possible, is to do it before, but not 5 minutes before, like a couple of days before. So you have time to digest, and you have time to do some more work if you need to, and you have time to call your supervisor and say, hey, I opened something I can't handle alone. Can I have some help, please? Okay. Yeah, but just to make sure I got you right, I heard what you described. Did you put the last two representations, or did you stop at the first two because it was so difficult?
I put 4 elements, and I did with my element and the client, but we weren't supposed to put represent the roles, right? So that's where I'm clear. So when I was stepping in, so you said to go back to connect with my own element, right? After putting the last 2 elements. So totally I had put 4. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did put 4. And when I did
and then you felt that. Okay. So one of the things that can happen is that after we put aside one layer of transference, one layer of getting captured, another one gets revealed. So maybe it was there under the surface. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know you or your client, but this is my first thought about it. I hope it is helpful. Thank you. And
thank you.
Gabriela,
I'll sit with it.
Thank you. Gabriela, please.
Hi, Nir. It was an interesting exercise. So I had this client that I felt like he likes me. So in my first representation, I felt he likes me. And then after I brought the first element next to me, I only felt the sympathy. And then when I brought the 4th element next to him, well, in his role, first he needed help. And then after bringing the 4th element next to him, I felt neutral. So it's so interesting, from having the thought that he likes me, then sympathy, and then I just felt neutral. So I didn't care about he may like me or not. So just bringing the 4th element is very interesting. Because
that's what happens when you go back to your center.
It's very interesting, because in general, everyone has a feeling if somebody may like them, right? And my question to you was, I was projecting on him that he likes me, or, I mean, how did I get to neutral?
Well, neutral is actually our base base position with clients. Okay. If you find yourself liking a client very much, you move this way. If you find yourself disliking a client, you move that way.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And we want to be. It's okay to like on a personal basis. Of course, I have clients I like more than others. That's okay. But when this liking or disliking is affecting the process, then we want to do something about it. And I don't want to be busy with, does the client like me or not? We didn't meet for coffee.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
We meet to work on their issues.
But the truth is that specific person was, because he could choose from different other people, so he would always come see me and give me details from his life. So I felt like annoyed at one point. Yeah. But it's interesting how just bringing those elements can make you become centered. Thank you for this exercise.
Thank you. In general, I've built almost all of the shadow constellation structures to be effective in little time, because I like to work fast. Let me say a few things about the training, if you will. We begin in 2 weeks on Monday, 9th of September. It's a 10 weeks training. We meet for 3.5 hours each week on Zoom. Amit here, where are you, Amit? Raise your hand, say hello. Will be the training assistant, and we hold it together, Kate and Brett and Amit and myself. In each lesson, we will cover different aspects of the shadow. First, more general shadow archetypes and the basics of family constellations. Then we'll go to how the shadow shows up in the clinic for 2 lessons and how to work with it, of course. We'll go over cultural shadows and collective shadows. Golden shadows, which has to do with the good things that we're not in touch with, and then we project on other people. Oh, you're so clever, oh, you're so creative, oh, you're so nice, I'm not. Which is, among others, base for attraction. We'll go through shadows of helplessness, which I think is a must for any therapist or facilitator. Through the shadows of aggression and vulnerability, and final aspects about it. Shadows of sexuality, which is important for safety in many ways. And finally, shadows of death and goodbye, which, a big topic nowadays and always. Every lesson has some theory, some practical experience, in either a group session or working in couples or small groups. It's okay if you know constellations in advance. It's okay if you don't know constellation in advance. You're very welcome anyway. We'll send you the link with the recording so you can have a look. You're welcome to contact me directly if you have any questions, or Kate. Thank you, everybody who say thank you. And one last thing, maybe, as there are several people here today who actually took the training before, if any of you, 1 or 2, would like to shortly say something about the training, I'd appreciate it, but hey, no pressure, okay? So only if you feel like saying something, you're very welcome, as there are a few of you here.
Hello, Nir. Hello, everybody. I'm Clara. I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I did take the training last year. And I'm actually considering taking it again. First, I thought no, but then I'm like, yes, I want to see the growth. I want to see how I do. So I was going to send you a message Nir later on, but yes, I think it really changed a lot into create certain awareness within my practice. So I'm very appreciative of the work.
Thank you, dear Clara. Amit, as the assistant, as the future assistant, would you like to say something or present yourself for a moment?
Hey, everyone. So thank you, Nir. My name is Amit. I'm so excited to step into this field and this work again. And thank you for this little taste. I think it's very representative of just how meaningful the work is in this topic and how it invokes so much in all of us in different ways, but we have so much in common as well. So excited to do this.
Thank you. Okay, we said 1 hour. It's 1 hour and 1 minute. I'll try to be good with times. So really, thank you so much for being here today, and you're welcome to get in touch, ask any questions. We begin, as I said, in 2 weeks, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you.